Welcome to today's episode of the Coppercast, our regular podcast about issues and information important to education across the Copper Country. I'm your host, Dave Sim, Public Engagement Specialist at the CCISD. Today we're focusing on a presentation delivered by Shauna, Wunrow, and Heather Mroz, Behavior Support Specialists at the CCISD, to talk about the impact of the digital world on our youngest learners. The presentation, titled Kids These Days, is focused on the book Anxious Generation by Jonathon Haidt. The presentation was delivered on April 14th, 2025 as part of our Common Grounds Learning Series. Here's Shauna and Heather.
We talked about how when we were going to present for the area-wide in-service, like what should we present on, and this seems to be really relevant to what a lot of teachers and educators are experiencing right now of what is going on with kids these days. Like, they are different. There is something different going on. And we had read over summer, I think? I don't know.
Yeah, last summer.
Yeah, we had read The Anxious Generation and by Jonathon Haidt. And he does have a website with pretty much all the information that we're presenting to you. So if you're interested in digging into more of it, there's more there. But he talks about a great rewiring of childhood and digs into why kids are so different today than they were even, 15, 20 years ago.
And I would say that's a question we get a lot in behavior support services. Like, the kids are just different. The kids are just different. And the answer is yes. Yes, the kids are different. And Jonathon Haidt has a theory about why. So his theory is that what has happened is that we're overprotecting kids in the real world now, and then we're under-protecting them online. And he talks about the loss of the play-based childhood. We're going to get into how engaging in play really helps kids learn how to get along with other people, and that's not happening anymore because they're doing this online now. So from about 2010 to 2015 is when a lot of kids got cell phones, and it's the front-facing camera on the cell phone, and then unrestricted access to video games, and pornography also is an issue with the boys. So 2013 is when social media really exploded, and we're going to go through some data here where it just shows the impact that's having on kids, and they are, because of the great rewiring of childhood.
So it starts in the early 2010s. So really, he emphasizes that between 2010 and 2015, there was this huge jump in the rise of technology and the smartphone especially. So if you can kind of see that shaded gray bar graph there, in all of these slides that we're going to show you, it has that, and it's always between 2010 and 2015, and that's really where we see this change happening the most. And
That's so it's what we're seeing is a rise in internalizing disorders. Anxiety and depression are those top two lines. You don't see a rise in the more externalizing disorders, where by externalizing we mean mental health issues that result in some sort of behavior change. For the most part, it is these internalizing things. So down here at the bottom, I don't know if you read that, but schizophrenia, substance abuse, anorexia, bipolar disorder, and a little rise in ADHD. But these other things aren't rising. We see anxiety and depression absolutely soaring. That's percent of U.S. undergrads with a mental illness.
And it's hitting kids younger and younger. So Gen Z has been really hit harder with this than any other generation before. So you can see the age groups there. The 18 to 25 is up at the top, and that has just really skyrocketed. And these are percentage of U.S. adults reporting high levels of anxiety. And this is mostly, like, we do see a spike with COVID around 2020 to 2022, but it was on a steep rise even before that.
And he really, there's if you go on YouTube, there's a ton of interviews with Jonathon Haidt who wrote this book, and really fantastic, and gives even more information than he has in the book. And he said a lot of people have challenged him, like COVID is the issue. That's why we're seeing problems with kids now. And really, if you look at his data, that is not panning out. It really started before that. So another argument that he has gotten is that, well, we're doing SEL, we're giving kids the language for this stuff, and so they're just self-reporting more. But his data is not based on self-reports. His data is based on actual outcomes, suicide, self-harm, things like that. So you could see that, again, that 2010 to 2015 is where kids really, that gray bar is where kids got the smartphones with the front-facing cameras and really got unrestricted access to the internet, and that's where we see things just really start to take off.
And it's not just like reports of, as Heather said, like feeling anxious or even like diagnosis with anxiety and depression, but they're being hospitalized more often, which is reflective of more severe symptoms. So this is especially impacting girls. Boys too, but girls have really skyrocketed in the amount of self-harm and suicidal attempts. And
success sounds like a terrible word to use, but actually committed suicide has also gone up as well, and the rates with adolescent girls now are higher than at any point in history.
So this is not just an American problem, this is worldwide. I feel like a lot of times we're in our own little bubble in our country, and we always think that this is a US problem, and it's not. This is happening worldwide. So we see like the UK, Ontario, Australia, New Zealand, European nations, and then the last one is school alienation worldwide. So these are all reflective of the same problem that we're seeing in most modernized countries that have, basically that have cell phones.
Mm-hmm. So he's shown, his data has shown that there are issues beyond just the mental health situation. Academic performance is suffering, sleep, time with friends in person is plummeting for kids, and exercise is also plummeting. So these are all side effects of this, the smartphones.
So we really see this decline of the play-based childhood, and it starts around the 70s and towards the end of the 70s. And the author explains that social trust collapses among adults. That's, the stranger danger is starting to take place, and parents are becoming more fearful and more protective, and less willing to let their kids spend time unsupervised out in the world. So what has happened is they have things that are less structured, like socializing outside of the home, outdoor play, just kid-focused play has gone down, and things that are supervised, even if they're good things, like sports, homework, and screen-based activities have all gone up. So it's become more, our kids' lives have become more and more structured and more adult-centric, rather than just letting kids, run wild like we used to do. And so it's caused kind of this overprotectiveness to an extent in the real world, and as we were talking about before, kind of this underprotectiveness on the online world.
So we also see an increase in the number of hours that parents are spending parenting, and this is kind of where we got that term helicopter parenting. You can see that has really gone significantly up. It's the hours that parents are spending supervising their kids. So they're getting much less time where they get to wind up in a problem and then have to solve it themselves. And wind up in a problem and have to solve it themselves. Like Shauna was saying, running wild, like we went out in the neighborhood and you had a disagreement with a kid and you solved that yourself. And that's not happening now. It's either happening online or parents are there to mediate it.
And kids are at this time starting to spend less and less time with each other. So the graph on the left is meeting up with friends every day, and that has really declined. If you again see that 2010 to 2015 bar, it has significantly dropped at that time. And then just the amount of time you spend with friends, minutes per day, has significantly decreased as well. And the that graph on the right, it shows it by age, so if you can't read it, it's the 15 to 24-year-olds that have really declined. Everyone else, it has declined some, but kind of stayed a lot more steady.
So the other things that have declined are trying alcohol, getting a driver's license, having sex, and getting a job. Some of those things, we would probably all agree it's good that we don't see kids, trying alcohol and having sex. However, it's not that kids aren't engaging in the risky behavior. It's that they're now engaging in the risky behavior online, which is a lot harder for some parents to monitor. I mean, we have tech-savvy parents, of course, who are on top of that. But if you're not as tech-savvy, your kid probably has a lot of freedom to do some very scary and risky things that you may not know about if you're not monitoring them online. I think you think, oh, they're not out, with their friends till 2 o'clock in the morning, so they're not getting into trouble. But if those things are happening online, that's very scary.
And it also just kind of ties into, this protectiveness of the real world that we've been talking about. Kids aren't learning the hard lessons in real life. So some of these activities, while not good, are also, they can also teach lessons too, and those things aren't happening even, except for online, I should say. And so the virtual world arrives, and so this is just showing different types of technology and how long they took to really take off and be common in most households. And if you see the first line there is the radio. That one, it stretched over about a 10 to 20 year period before almost everybody had essentially everybody had a radio. And then color TV, internet, color TV took a while. Internet was faster. Smartphone was even faster than that. And then social media and microcomputers, so tablets, those smartphones are all basically within like a couple years, everybody had that. So it just goes to show how fast this technology has been kind of thrust upon our society. And
then Jonathon Haidt argues that the play-based childhood has really officially ended. Kids spend so little time in unstructured play at this point that they just aren't learning those lessons the way they used to.
So essentially, according to the author, we have blocked human development. These kids are not developing, as we said, they're not learning the lessons of the real world, and they are spending so much time online that they're not able to, develop social skills and people skills properly.
So I don't need to read that to you. As I said, on YouTube, there's just a ton of interviews with him. And there was an interview that I watched from late January, and he said that this is now up to 50% of teens reporting being online almost all the time. So when they have their phones in school, they're either hiding them in the classroom, or they're running into the classroom but then back to their lockers and continuing these conversations with other kids and online. So they're never truly disengaging from that. And I think about, we think, oh, they don't have the phones in the classrooms. If we say no phones in classrooms, there's not gonna be phones in classrooms, right? But if you look, I know not all of you have access to all the school's Swiss data, school-wide information systems, but we have some buildings where it's just the tech violations are just out of this world, and because the kids are sneaking them into classrooms. And I remember back, I didn't get into much trouble as a kid, but I like to eat crackers through the school day. And I would have a little Ziploc baggie of oyster crackers in my desk. And I successfully got away with eating oyster crackers through the school day in elementary school. And the teacher turns their head for a second and you're doing that. And so to think that these kids don't have their phones in the classroom during instruction time, I think is delusional, because if they do have them there and we're not seeing it, there's no way to be able to see that all going on in the classroom. There's so much, even just working in behavior support services, you go in to observe in a classroom, you see so much that the teacher doesn't see when you debrief with them after. There's just so much that goes on. So it's a massive distraction in schools.
Yeah. So we've kind of talked a little bit about this, but what is the issue, the real world versus the virtual world? So when we say the kids aren't developing their social skills or people skills, it's because of this. Because in the real world, you're physically next to people. You can read body language. You learn to read body language, or and timing for turn taking, things like that. Kids aren't learning turn taking online. You can just blab, you type, and it's not a conversation. It's you maybe spewing your opinion or whatever it may be out into the world, but it is not a true conversation typically. In the real world, you're usually talking just either one-on-one or one to, several, but not to the entire world. Whereas in the virtual world, it is literally the entire internet that you're talking to. And then there's a high bar. This is, I think, one of the most important pieces.
I agree.
Yeah.
This is the scariest piece.
In the real world, there is a very high bar for entry and exit of a relationship. So you have to offend me pretty bad for me to not ever want to speak to you again in the real world, especially, you think about coworkers or for students, their classmates, things like that. You have to have a relationship with these people. So there's going to be a high bar for, no longer having that relationship. And there's also a high bar for entry into a friendship or things like that. You're going to seek out the people that, have shared values and things like that. Whereas in the virtual world, there is a very low bar. If you can instantly, connect with people, I put in quotes, I guess. But for, if you have similar likes or interests, you can go find a group for anything on Facebook or wherever. And there's also a very low bar for exit. So if you don't like what somebody's saying, what do? Just block, right? Click block or leave the group or whatever. There is no incentive to try to mediate a conflict or anything like that.
I've seen this play out in set. I've had little kids say, I'm just gonna delete you. I'm gonna block you. No, you can't do that in real life. That's not a thing. So kids, they don't understand that they have to maintain those relationships with people. So the result is then attention fragmentation, because you don't have to kids just don't ever have to maintain their attention for more than 10 minutes because they're not reading books. They're on this thing that's constantly changing. Social deprivation, as Shauna just talked about, the sleep deprivation, and then addiction. 5 to 12% of kids are actually clinically addicted to these things, and that's by design. from the folks that invented this stuff. They literally, there's actually like meeting notes that have been discovered from Meta, where they're looking at like, how can we actually make this genuinely addictive? So the 5 to 12% refers to the addictions to social media and the addictions to video games. And then it's hypothesized that porn is also in there, but that's a lot less clear to quantify because it tends to be a little more covert. So parents maybe don't know, and kids aren't necessarily self-reporting. They may tell you how many hours a day they spend on video games. They're not necessarily going to tell you how many hours a day they're spending on porn. You want to click that? And so the top two there, we have that box around that because the sleep deprivation, schools can't do a whole lot about it. Can we do education? Sure. Can we promote good, healthy habits? Absolutely. But the things that we really have to deal with, and we have to be more specifically, we have to adapt to, and then we have to function differently because the kids are different now, are the top two. And that's just Shauna and I just feel that way. This is not what Jonathon Haidt said. This is just our take on it. We have to adapt because the kids' attention is fragmented. We have to adapt because of that social deprivation piece.
And we can't necessarily control the sleep deprivation or addiction pieces.
Yes, we can try to chip away at that, but that's not directly in our control.
So what do we do? John Haidt really specifies that you can text your kid during the school day. If you can text your kid during the school day, your kid is not getting a good education. So even if it's in their locker all day, they know that it's in their locker. And even if they're not going to check it, which a lot of kids are, even if they leave it in there, what do you think they're thinking about? Like, they're thinking about what is on that phone and the connections that they have online and how, their social media accounts and things like that. So he really stresses that it needs to be a foundational reform and it needs to be a whole societal shift. So some of the things would be like no smartphones before high school, no social media before 16. And I think a lot of parents are on board with a lot of that, but a lot of them aren't, or just, aren't in a place where they're willing or able to fight their kid on some of these things. Phone-free schools, and he stresses that it really needs to be all or nothing. Like, they shouldn't even be coming in with them, or, and we'll talk about some of the things that other places are doing, but far more unsupervised play and childhood independence. That was the other thing. We need to have them regaining some of these skills that they would learn in the real world through play. And then what do we do at school? We teach. We adapt just like we do all day, every day. As educators, we just keep chugging along. So,
I think because the kids don't necessarily have the skills for that unstructured play, if we were to just say, okay, we're gonna have more unstructured play, we're probably gonna get more behavior problems during those times, which is then where things like PBIS come into play, because those are ways we can structure the environment and teach kids what to do if in these situations, since they aren't learning that on their own. So we have to provide that time, but also we need to teach them how to be able to manage that, because they just haven't learned it on their own because they're not
we need
with other kids.
Provide the instruction and then allow them to practice it.
Yep. So he calls this a collective action problem, because if we don't all do something about it, then there's this fear of missing out going on. If the kid, like, let's say you're the parent that says, no, you're not taking your cell phone to school. But the kid knows that every single one of their friends is still on the social media all day, then that becomes a massive distraction for that kid, even if they don't have their phone. So it really, in order for this to be effective, it can't just be this even if we're in the copper country, if let's say Houghton were to go completely phone free, the kids still have friends in Hancock, they have friends in Baraga, and they know that those kids are still on social media. And so, and then you get kids trying to sneak the phones more. And I really think kids are very successful at sneaking these things. My own eating oyster crackers through all of elementary school, and like, I know that you can hide these things. So I think that that he is very right, that it is a collective action problem. And we could say, like, well, that's very unrealistic that we're all going to decide that kids should not have phones at all in school, or kids should not have phones at all until they're 16 or whatever. However, as a society, we have made decisions across the board. I think we all agree, and I think almost everybody agrees, that 8-year-olds shouldn't be running the street at 2 o'clock in the morning. So there are certain things we all agree on that kids really should not be doing. Somehow we have to get everybody to wrap their heads around the fact that they really shouldn't have phones. So right before we did this at the area-wide in-service, Brazil had gone completely phone-free. And then I tried to make a list of the countries there are countries that have gone completely phone-free. There are countries that have just phone-free schools at certain ages. There are whole countries that have, legislation going through, and it's changing so rapidly right now. It became really difficult to try and make you a concise list.
In fact, we had to update one of the slides just this
Yep.
morning because since our in-service, it has changed, so.
Yeah, so at this point, 60 countries ban them in classrooms. But Jonathon Haidt would argue, and I'm with him on this, that that's not enough. It needs to be not in schools at all.
And this is just, this is the updated slide that I just put up this morning. In the United States, states that have a statewide ban or restriction, so it's not necessarily like an outright ban, but they might have a state law on, where, when they can use their phones in schools. And I think Florida was like the only one that had an outright ban, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Like we said, it's changing very rapidly.
And some have banned them and then gone back. Saudi Arabia, last night, Saudi Arabia has banned them, but then dialed it back because parents argued that they can't get a hold of their kids during crises. However, anyone who manages crises knows that that's not helpful when the parents are able to get a hold of their kids during crises. We don't necessarily want that for safety. So, but yeah, so it's going back and forth, some of these.
And then the blue ones that statewide legislation has been introduced, and then the mid blue, and then the light blue was that they have a recommendation or have started a pilot program or something, so kind of in the works. And then the gray is are states that have not made any moves as far as cell phones in schools go as of yet.
So Michigan, I'm going to go to the next slide. Michigan has a bill that's gone to the House, and it is in committee as of yesterday, which I believe means they're tweaking it and looking at it before it goes up for a vote. But as it stands right now, it would be K-5 fully prohibited on school grounds. 6 to 8 have them but not use them at any time. And then 9 to 12 banned from instruction time only. So, I mean, it's a step in the right direction, but it really, that slide where we had the little police logo on there, that's because when you're just banning them during instruction time, it turns the teachers into police. And as some of our schools' Swiss data is showing, when you see tech violations higher than any other violation in the school, and we have actually schools that show that, those teachers are just spending their whole day trying to deal with kids with cell phones. And I've seen it while observing in classrooms too, and it's very ugly when you get into a power struggle with a kid over a phone.
So what should teachers do? Now, the book basically says, like, as a society, this is what we need to do. But Heather and I were talking, we're like, well, what can we do? Like, as teachers, what can we give to educators as kind of a guidance? So we decided what would Shauna and Heather do.
Yeah, so this does not come from the book. This is simply after reading the book, debriefing, reflecting on what we do know, this is what we think needs to happen.
So as the,
And this comes
behavior-
from the CMOD, if you're familiar with the classroom management observation tool.
Yes.
These, a lot of these, the engaging learners, explicitly teaching SEL, and then we need to adapt, we need to change. The kids are different, we need to do something different.
Yeah, so, we just listed all these ways to engage learners, but really providing clear routines and structure is gonna be like, if you can do one thing, that is probably one of the biggest things, but, we talk about having how we have to bring the circus to town every time we teach, and it's gonna look different in an elementary versus a secondary classroom, but really we gotta get these kids engaged, because if they are engaged in the learning, they're not focused on what is in their pocket or in their locker.
And the number one way to engage them is those opportunities to respond.
Yeah.
So you're not sitting for any length of time without doing something. An opportunity to respond is when a teacher engages in a behavior that causes the student then to have to engage in a behavior, either saying something, writing something, looking something up, saying something to the teacher, saying something to their neighbor, writing something down. You already said that. When the kid has to do something, so the quicker you can have them doing something. And a way to get those rates really high is to have choral responding rather than just a kid raises their hand. Because if just one of you raises your hand, that's only one opportunity to respond. But if I asked all of you to do like a thumbs up or thumbs down, then that's 7 opportunities to respond. So you can really get those rates up higher when you have all the kids do stuff together.
So what can schools and legislators do? It just talks about, you can talk to your districts, talk to your states about how to, there's different things about guidance out there about what to do and what not to do, and everybody's learning by, it's trial by error right now, because this is the Wild West of
If you'd like to read this article, that QR code goes directly to the article.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in doing something systemically, this is a great article to read. I'm looking at the administrators.
That's all we had. There's PDF of the slides if anyone would like access to them, but.
Questions, comments, want to talk about this?
I was just looking at your age, so of the impact rate, 2010 to 2015.
Yeah, that's
And
when
many of those-
everybody got this.
And many of those students at that time are now the parents of our young students. And I was just listening to a podcast about language development and the connection to reading. And I just wonder how this is just gonna keep compounding on now this next kind of generation.
Yeah, Gen A, is that what they're called now?
The speech IEPs are through the roof. I was in one classroom and there was 11 out of 20 kids with a speech IEP. And I was just like, what is going on? So you just wonder now, these are our parents. And even just the modeling of adults with cell phones in classrooms,
Yes.
I think is a huge piece that's missing too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Of stow it away and for our adults in our classrooms.
right. And some of the schools that have banned cell phones outright, they do absolutely ban for adults as well. They're just off the table.
When will that data be available for those schools that have done that? Would that be interesting?
Yeah, that will be nice to see. I mean, it's all happened just in the last few years, so.
So I have a question. So I wouldn't put the schools we've kind of done this to ourselves in a little bit. We've made our students go 1-to-1 on devices. My kid's in 5th grade, and I'm like, what have you done at school today? And half of it's we played Minecraft on
Chromebooks.
I finished my reading, and I know he did. He reads, so I'm not worried about it. But he plays games during instructional time.
Yeah.
And we hear that, and yet at the same time the schools are cutting away gym classes and cutting away like actual playtime. Like we put ourselves into this box. Like how do we fix that? Like what are I
remember years ago, when we first started doing, the reading, PD for, MTSS, so it was like 15 years ago, and we sat down and we did, all the schools do, like a task analysis throughout the day, because it was when that 90-minute reading block first came out, and people, nobody, they're like, we don't have time for that, we don't have time for that. But if you get people to sit down and just like, what are the kids doing at this point, this point, this point, this point, and every like 3 minutes figuring out what everybody's doing, and you can really figure out like what things can be removed. And I think that if people, I haven't heard of anybody doing that in like 15 years, at least any of our local schools sitting down and doing that in like 15 years. It'd be really cool to see if we were to sit down and say like, how many kids actually are finishing their work early and they're sitting on video, you know, Minecraft, instead of interacting with peers or reading a book, which they would have to have sustained attention for more than 10 minutes, which is where we need to get to. So I think it would be really interesting to see, like, because that's scary to hear that that's happening.
Any other questions for us?
Say, well done.
Thank
That was
you.
very well done. In fact, I
Yeah,
need to take a picture of this.
It was, when we read it, it was like, oh my gosh, like.
Yeah. I think Houghton might have done a book study on this
Middle
book.
school, and they're
Okay.
moving to that state bill, they'll probably be following that in the
Okay.
fall. And the middle school put a survey out as of Wednesday, I was at their team meeting to their parents, and they had 90 responses so far, and all were in support of there.
Yeah.
So at middle school, the idea is you could walk in the door with it, they're not checking, but it has to be in your locker all day.
Yeah.
Like, they don't wanna see it.
But they're sneaking it.
I know, but at least they're making a
It's
step.
a step in
Yeah,
the right
it's a
direction.
step.
It makes it harder for teachers,
Yeah.
you know, when they're allowed in the door.
Right.
Because then you're just battling.
But at least
Yeah.
there was a lot of support from the parents.
Right, and I wonder how much education those parents got prior to doing that survey. Because I think so many parents just don't even realize the damage that this is causing. So they're answering that survey based on, you know, maybe not knowing. So if we
And
could educate people more.
You know, as like parents, I think they also want that lifeline to their kid when, you know, in case there is a crisis and they don't necessarily have the education or the knowledge of, you know, that law enforcement recommends that they really don't have that. We don't want, if God forbid we had a, you know, massive crisis, and you had however many kids, hundreds of kids calling 911 or trying to call their parents, and it's gumming up the, you know, the system so that crisis responders can't communicate. That's a big issue. We've talked about that in prepare training, and so I think giving them that knowledge as well, and you know, they say, well, what do I do if I have to get a hold of my kid? I think people have forgotten that, like, before 2010, like you would call the office and these things. So maybe just reminding them that's the way to do it.
Mhm.
I think it does get a little tricky though, right?
It
As
does.
your kids get older, because as your kids have athletic
Sports and-
practices
yeah.
and stuff after school,
It is
you
hard.
know,
We
that-
survived
and-
30 years ago.
well,
I'm
and,
so
and
happy.
split
Yeah.
parents too, that's
Yeah.
the other, you know, thing that I
Mhm.
think about where, you know, you've got one parent that's dropping off and then another parent's picking up.
Yep.
You know, at the end of the day, that's where it does start to get a little bit tricky.
We've
So-
also heard of, sorry,
No, go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, we also have heard of schools like having the students check them into the office, turn them off, check them into the office, get them back at the end of the day, you know, before sports practice.
So a
practice or
friend who
whatever.
lives here, just did her, the sabbatical in Sweden, and that's what they did, and they just checked them in and so they got them at the end of the day, so they still have them for the sports
But they weren't in their lockers,
They weren't
they
in the
weren't
locker, yep.
able to
She said it
access
was
them.
wonderful. Another friend in Australia, who their school also does that, you just check them in, and they cannot access them during the day, and she said it's just fantastic.
And logistically, it sounds like, I mean, it's a big task, especially, you know, for our especially for our bigger schools too, but really for any of our schools. But if we can figure something like that out, it would be.
And if my friend has their cell phone at the office and my other friend has their cell phone at the office and I have mine at the office, then we're not worried about what's being said, we can focus on education.
Right, that's where that collective, you know, if just some do it, some don't, then you have kids
That
who, that
mindset.
fear, but yep, your
And-
mind is,
And this wasn't part of our presentation, but like we've heard both anecdotally and like I've come across articles saying this too, that kids are self-reporting that if the phone is taken away for a significant period of time, that they feel happier. And so it's interesting.
well, how do you feel when you
know?
forget your phone? After that first
Panic.
feeling of, oh no, I forgot my phone, there's that peace kind of settles in, like, wow,
Yeah.
I can be fully present and nobody can bother me. It's kind of glorious.
That's actually
It's like,
entertaining.
yeah, so I've stopped turning around what I've forgotten, and I'm like, I'm just gonna roll with this, cause it feels good.
I have this sneaky feeling that it won't be like my current generation, but it'll be the one after me, like the ones who are in their early 20s,
The
where
ones most affected.
well, they'll have gone through like a full lifetime of having, like, I was on like the birth of Facebook, so like I had a childhood that wasn't totally connected, but the one behind me will, and they'll have a much more experience of like what this actually does throughout their lifetime. And I know that there are moments where like I get anxiety about it, and so I can't imagine what they've gone through. But I think that there'll be a maturing of this soon, as they come into like adulthood more, that there'll be lessening of this, just because they'll have had an understanding of what this impact really is.
Yeah.
I get that feeling.
I mean, it's kind of, I think about that too. When I was growing up, it was, the internet there was no safety about the internet. People would say, like, 12-year-olds in chat rooms that they had no business being in, and as an adult, like, I feel like, our generation has learned to kind of, like, what internet safety really means, and are now teaching that. But, like, as a kid, we didn't know. So I feel like, as this Gen Z, and a lot of them are entering adulthood now, but as this generation is enters adulthood, hopefully we see that.
And I guess I would push back a little bit, like, I would say kids are not different. Because when a kid is born, right, you are who you are. It's we that are different. And the way we
Our
raise
society
our
is
kid,
different,
Therefore, by the time you hit kindergarten or preschool, whatever that is, like, that childhood might look different, on that front. So, like, I guess from an educator perspective, like, I wouldn't want to lose that piece of, like, kids aren't changing. They're adapting to the world that we're creating.
We've created for them.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's
we've
it.
changed them.
Yeah.
Jonathon Haidt talks about pruning, and so when kids are at that middle school age, when the things that they do on a regular basis start to, the pieces that they don't use start to fall away, and the brain prunes itself, and then you get the myelination of the pathways that are used most frequently. So that's when it's changing, when that pruning starts, like that late childhood, early. And I absolutely agree that the kids aren't changing themselves. We've done this to them by limiting the experiences that they have. So then those pathways for playing video games are getting really fast, right? Really early, yeah. And those other pathways are pruning off those ability to interact with other adults.
No,
Or I mean, other people.
They're not being born with
No,
something different,
no.
right?
It goes back to the meta in their notes.
Yes.
And we need to make this addictive.
Exactly. And that's, I mean,
That's an
there's
adult
lots of evidence of that. Yeah, absolutely. And the first chapter of the book is particularly interesting because he takes the stance that, like, if you, like, what we've done is this massive experiment without even really realizing to do it, that we're doing it. And he likens it to like, would you send your kid to Mars if you knew that when they came back, they wouldn't have all these, no, you wouldn't do that. So like people, if they knew what was happening, maybe we wouldn't engage in I'm not explaining it very well, but it's an excellent first chapter, and he really makes like, we've engaged in this, we've done this without realizing the outcome. And now that we've already done it, we're realizing what the outcome is. We have all these kids who do not have interpersonal skills, but are really good at playing video games. Yeah.
And I don't know how because I guess I would challenge us as the adults, like, I agree, fine and dandy, kids take them away, they don't need them in school. But I would say that's for us as well.
100%, Jim, yeah.
I mean, it's a struggle for us to sit through a meeting.
Yeah.
One meeting for 45 minutes without us,
Yep.
like,
It has, since reading that book,
This has been profound.
I have
Yeah.
I have been so much more conscious of when I am on my phone,
Yep.
especially like around my kids, like since reading this book, and even, and I'm guilty of it too. Like it hasn't, changed my behavior completely, probably because, they know
You're
how
addicted.
to get to. Right. But not, I would say like significantly has decreased the amount of screen time that I have,
Yeah.
especially at home.
Well, I
This
think
was
we've
a real
all been
eye-opener.
in a meeting, presenting, and someone gets a phone call that's more important and has to get up and walk out. That's like the rudest thing ever, but they think it's okay because that one phone call is so much more important than listening to you.
yeah, why is that okay? I
Yeah.
mean, for any of us,
Yeah.
I don't know how many meetings I'm in where it rings, I'm like, okay, you can take it.
Yeah.
Right, but why am I even saying that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is that even okay for me to say it to you? Oh, don't worry, take the phone call, like, we'll move on.
Yeah.
Well, we got used to that,
A few people have jobs where there are true emergencies and they might have to take it, but very few.
very,
Right.
probably not in
Including
education.
superintendents.
Exactly,
Okay.
Jim.
But even on that end, like,
Yeah.
they can handle it.
But really,
Well-
and I'm not, and I am picking on superintendents, but I
Well,
presented
the
to
worst.
them where they get up and walk out. Or
Yeah.
I'm walking, I go past the hall and they're out by the door
Yeah.
talking in private conversation when Jim is holding a meeting.
Yeah, and you bring up down there, and I think we think about that pruning in adolescence and losing those skills, and I started working down there before cell phones. I remember it was like I started in 2009, so it was about 2010. Katrina got a cell phone, and the coolest thing about it was though that she could go out to the local schools and schedule meetings and be able to see her calendar, because of course our laptops didn't work in all the local schools. So I ended up getting a smartphone because of that calendar piece, because you used to have to print out your Google Calendar anytime you went to a local school to then try and schedule a meeting. In that way, it has really facilitated things. But you're right, Jim, that everyone's ability to handle those situations are way downhill once they were able to immediately contact someone.
All of a sudden, it was your problem, right? Or mine.
Right,
Like, no, it's still
right.
your problem.
Yes,
I feel
I'm 100% with
a
you
good
on that.
example of that, like, and the pruning, and even in our own brains, is like how many of us had, a dozen or dozens of phone numbers memorized back,
Oh,
like
right.
in the 90s.
It's scary, yeah.
It's gone. I know my husband's and I know my mom's.
Yeah.
That's it.
So
I can't tell you anyone
Your
else.
own?
And my own. Sometimes I'm like, that's a good question. So you lose it, right?
Yeah, what are you
Like,
gonna do if you suddenly don't have to call somebody?
And I don't wanna, like, it's not like cell phones are evil and all this, like, technology there's a lot of great things about technology, but trying to figure out like how to do it in a way that isn't detrimental to,
A tool.
or, yeah.
A tool that you have to use.
Yeah.
It's like everything.
Right, and people really need to be cognizant of the
risks.
The risks,
Yeah.
and that interpersonal skill piece is so scary, and I see it playing out,
I mean, everywhere in society.
everywhere in society, but particularly with
Airplanes
like
and
upper
waiting
elementary
rooms and
kids.
like all that,
Thanks to Heather and Shauna for the presentation. Be sure to join us for our next Common Grounds learning presentation entitled Visible Learning, Unpacking John Hattie's Updated Effect Size Research on Monday, April 28th. It'll be facilitated by Sierra Bishop and Lori Wisniewski in Conference Room B of the CCISD offices. That's it for today's episode. Thank you for listening to the Coppercast. Be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube channel or wherever you listen. On behalf of the Copper Country Intermediate School District, thanks for supporting a lifetime of learning.